Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, 2nd Canto, Chapter 2, The Lord in the Heart. Text 17. Nayatra kalo nimisham pada prabhu Kuto nu deva jagatamna ya ishvare Nayatra sattam na rajastamascha Na vaivikaro na mahan pradhanam Na, not, yatra, wherein, kala, destructive times, animisham, of the heavenly demigods, para, superior, prabhu, controller, kuta, where is there, nu, certainly, deva, the demigods, jagatam, the mundane creatures, yea, those, ishare, rules, na, not, yatra, therein, sattvam, mundane goodness, na, nor, raja, mundane passion, tama, mundane ignorance, cha, also, na, nor, vai, certainly, vikara, transformation, na, nor, mahan, the material causal ocean, pradhanam, material nature. Translation. In that transcendental state of labdo prashanti, there is no supremacy of devastating time, which controls even the celestial demigods, who are empowered to rule over mundane creatures. And what to speak of the demigods themselves? Nor is there the mode of material goodness, nor passion, nor ignorance, nor even the false ego, nor the material causal ocean, nor the material nature. Purport. Devastating time, which controls even the celestial demigods by its manifestations of past, present, and future, does not act on the transcendental plane. The influence of time is exhibited by the symptoms of birth, death, old age, and disease. And these four principles of material conditions are present everywhere in any part of the material cosmos, up to the planet Brahmaloka, where the duration of life of the inhabitants appears to us to be fabulous. Insurmountable time even brings about the death of Brahma. So what to speak of other demigods like Indra, Chandra, Surya, Vayu, and Varuna. The astronomical influence directed by the different demigods over mundane creatures is also conspicuous by its absence. In material existence, the living entities are afraid of satanic influence. But for a devotee on the transcendental plane, there is no such fear at all. The living entities change their material bodies in different shapes and forms under the influence of the different modes of material nature. But in the transcendental state, the devotee is gunatita, or above the material modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance. Thus the false ego of I am the Lord of all I survey does not arise there. In the material world, the false ego of the living being, trying to lord it over the material nature, is something like the moth falling into a blazing fire. The moth is captivated by the glaring beauty of the fire, and when he comes to enjoy it, the blazing fire consumes him. In the transcendental state, the living being is pure in his consciousness, and as such, he has no false ego to lord it over the material nature. Rather, his pure consciousness directs him to surrender unto the Supreme Lord, as stated in the Bhagavad Gita, Vasudeva Sarvamiti Samahatma Sudurlabha. All this indicates that in the transcendental state there is neither material creation nor the causal ocean for material nature. The above-mentioned state of affairs is factual on the transcendental plane, but is factually revealed in a transcendentalist knowledge of the advanced state of pure consciousness. Such transcendentalists are of two types, namely the impersonalists and the devotees. For the impersonalists, the ultimate goal or destination is the Brahmajyoti of the spiritual sky. But for the devotees, the ultimate goal is the Vaikuntha planets. The devotees experience the above-mentioned state of affairs by attainment of spiritual forms for activity in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. But the impersonalist, because of his neglecting the association of the Lord, does not develop a spiritual body for spiritual activity, but remains a spiritual spark only, merged in the effulgent spiritual rays of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Lord is the full-fledged form of eternity, bliss, and knowledge, but the formless Brahmajyoti is simply eternity and knowledge. The Vaikuntha planets are also forms of eternity, bliss, and knowledge, and therefore the devotees of the Lord who are admitted into the abode of the Lord also get bodies of eternity, bliss, and knowledge. As such, there is no difference between one and another. The Lord's abode, name, fame, entourage, and so forth are of the same transcendental quality. And how this transcendental quality differs from the material world is explained herewith in this verse. In the Bhagavad Gita, 3 principal subjects have been explained by Lord Sri Krishna, namely Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga. But one can reach the Vaikuntha planets by the practice of Bhakti Yoga only. The other 2 are incompetent in helping one reach the Vaikuntha lokas, although they can, however, conveniently take one to the effulgent Brahmajyoti as described above. Om Agana Chimarandasya Yananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. This chapter, The Lord in the Heart, is presenting you with various possibilities. The issues began with Pritchett Maharaj questioning Shukadev Goswami in the first canto. What's the best thing to do for a human being? Especially, what's the best thing to do at the time of death? So in this chapter, you're seeing how non-sectarian Srimad Bhagavatam is, in that it's laying out all the various possibilities. In a real human civilization, these various possibilities are known and they are presented. That is real prosperity. That is real progress. So you have the choices laid out for you. And of course, the Lord in the heart is described very vividly in terms of personal form. And Srila Prabhupada explains that such elaborate descriptions of Paramatma, the supersoul in the heart, are there to make sure we don't fall into any kind of impersonalist consciousness, where we think that the ultimate is formless, nameless, activityless. In one sense, yes, you can say that the Supreme Absolute Truth is nameless in that Krishna has so many activities, unlimited activities, and therefore unlimited names. So no one name that is it, that's all. And you can say that the Supreme Absolute Truth is formless because, as you know, he has no material form. You can say he's activityless because none of his activities are forced by karma and they're not under the influence of the modes of material nature. To educate us in the unlimited variegatedness of the material world, unlimited because you'll never get to the end of it with material intelligence, and certainly the unlimited variegatedness of the spiritual world, we're getting some possibilities presented to us in this chapter. To see those possibilities, we need to understand that the human form of life should be destination conscious. From the time you take birth, you should be thinking, where will I be going next? That is real prosperity. That is real progress. And you should be educated into the various possible destinations because you are moving along. Of course, the civilization that we're currently part of has no elements of true humanity. No education, no knowledge of the various possibilities in terms of where your journey is going. And a journey has to go somewhere. So this chapter presents meditation on the Lord in the heart, from which you can become an impersonalist because you make the mistake of thinking the Paramatma that you're seeing in your meditation. You make the mistake of thinking that's you. You can be a mystic yogi, and by your process of meditating on the Lord in the heart, you become fascinated with mystic powers, which actually burden you. So as you know, the impersonalists are burdened by the desire to merge into the Supreme. The mystic yogis are burdened by fascination with so many mystic powers. And then, of course, you can, because this chapter, it's Srimad Bhagavatam, so everything sooner or later is going to wind up with Bhakti. So this chapter moves you on from meditation on the super soul in the heart to Bhagavan realization as the ultimate. But you can choose not to. You can choose to merge into the effulgence of the Lord. Also, it's mentioned you can choose to merge into the causal ocean. So all these possibilities are laid out in such a non-sectarian way. In this way, we get the full panorama, the full scope, and you can choose. Because this is Srimad Bhagavatam, this chapter will end up talking about rati, attraction for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and prem. This is real human progress. What you have today is not a human civilization. The mistake is to think that economic growth means peace, prosperity, and well-being. Whereas this chapter is presenting another kind of development, another kind of growth. What you have today under the name of economic growth is actually uneconomic growth. The costs on the environment are not taken into account. The costs on the human psyche, the stress, the emotional trauma, that's not taken into account. If you're actually a materialist, you have to consider that you're dealing with a fixed amount of resources that nature supplies and a fixed amount of capacity for waste disposal. You can't bring in resources from other planets. As a materialist, you don't even acknowledge life on other planets. You can't dump your waste into space, so you've got a fixed, according to the material point of view, you've got a fixed reality of certain amount of natural resources and a certain amount of space to dispose the waste. Once you go through such ordeal to transform the natural resources into consumer products. As Prabhupada points out elsewhere in the Bhagavatam, your creating of your objects of enjoyment is problematic, and then disposing of those objects is also problematic. So a real materialist can understand that with my extractive economy, my extractive so-called civilization, which is based on pulling out natural resources, there's only so much to go around. And then I have to, after I transform those resources, I've got to dispose of the waste. Where does it all go? So a genuine materialist understands that. But what you have today is not human life, you have animal life. Of course, animals don't destroy their own habitat. It's said about elephants that they destroy a certain part of the forest and then leave. By the dictates of material nature, they leave and wait for the forest to regenerate, and then they come back. Human beings don't do that. So right now, you have a so-called human civilization that every 60 seconds, the 9 nuclear powers of the world spend $157,000 per minute on nuclear weaponry every 60 seconds. That means last year, close to $90 billion spent just last year. I like the way Prabhupada writes in one purport that this emphasis on nuclear weaponry shows an uncontrolled mind. There are enough miseries in material existence that you don't have to come up with devilish ways to destroy the entire human species. Everything is focused on this urge, this necessity for economic growth. Even it is said that without economic growth, people become violent, they lose all their moral qualities. So in order to have good morality and in order to have peace, there has to be constant economic growth. But more and more people are realizing the earth can't handle it. So what can you do instead of having this crazy civilization we have now? You can emphasize spiritual growth. And that's why Bhagavatam is so important and so necessary. It's laying out to you all the possibilities for spiritual growth. And in a non-sectarian way, it's saying you want to be an impersonalist? Wait, you can do that. It's not recommended. So you have 3 different paths presented in this chapter. 2 for liberation, and then Bhakti, brought up at the end of the chapter, which of course does not aim for liberation. So you have the direct process for liberation by meditating in the Chakra system and bringing your life airs up so they don't go out of the 7 holes and then blasting off through the top of your head to the spiritual world if you're meditating on Vaikuntha. And then you have the indirect route presented in this chapter, where you go up through the various planetary systems until you reach Brahmaloka, and there you can, when Brahma goes back to Godhead, you can go with him. But bhakti is actually non-dependent on liberation. So therefore this chapter ends up emphasizing that hearing and chanting and the other processes of devotional service are the real goal. So you get 3 possibilities. In Brihad Bhagavatamrita, Sanatana Goswami presents Gopa Kumar as being on Maharloka, and he becomes intrigued about Tapaloka, where the 4 Kumaras reside, because Sanat Kumar comes to visit Maharloka, and Gopa Kumar is wondering, why is this visitor being revered so much? Where's he from? What's he all about? And so the residents of Maharloka tell him, he's coming down from Tapaloka. This is where the residents of Maharloka can go to escape the partial annihilation, because the whole universe during a partial annihilation becomes uninhabitable because of the fire of annihilation, and so the residents of Maharloka have got to move on. So Tapaloka is free from the partial annihilation. So Gopa Kumar becomes fascinated. What's going on up there? And so he goes there, and he notices everyone is in samadhi. When he arrives, there's a big meeting led by the 4 Kumaras, and they're discussing, like what's in the chapter of Bhagavatam, prayers by the personified Vedas, chapter 87 of the 10th canto, very Upanishadic discussion. So Gopa Kumar arrives, and there's this big convocation of all the sages on Tapaloka, and then the meeting ends, and Gopa Kumar wants to ask, well, tell me about life here. What's going on? What are you doing? But he can't find anyone to ask because they're all in samadhi. So he stays there for a while, and he's missing seeing Lord Jagannath, Lord of the universe. On Maharloka, he could see Lord Yageshwar, the Lord of sacrifice. But on Tapaloka, he's wondering, who do I see and how? And so the Kumaras tell him that stop trying to see with your eyes. The Lord appears in the pure consciousness of the heart. You'll see in that way. And even if you think you're seeing with the eyes, just like according to, this is Pipalayana, one of the super mystics residing on Tapaloka. He says, even just in the case of Dhruva or Prahlad, they thought they were seeing just with their eyeballs, but actually the Lord was appearing to them on the mirror of their consciousness, and then the eyes would verify that. Kind of a technical talk. So Gopa Kumar sees how everyone is in meditation, and then he decides to go to Brahmaloka because Lord Brahma appears on Tapaloka. And just like on Maharloka, Gopa Kumar's wondering about who is this sage who's come. It was Sanat Kumar from Tapaloka. Now Gopa Kumar's on Tapaloka, and who comes but Lord Brahma? And Gopa Kumar doesn't know who he is. He's got to ask the sages of Tapaloka who are deep in samadhi, Can you explain who this is? So in this way, you get such a picture of the whole universe. And that's what's going on in this chapter. You're getting an understanding of real growth, real prosperity. Either you end up with bhakti, or you take the direct path, you start with bhakti and increase the bhakti. You want to meditate on the super soul in the heart? By association with devotees, you understand Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, Bhagavaniti Shabhyate. So this chapter is talking about the Lord in the heart. It's entitled The Lord in the Heart, but it's not restricted just to Paramatma. It's assuming, because it's Srimad Bhagavatam, that you're going to move on as a Paramatma body with good association, with good knowledge. You're going to move on and understand that not only do you want to meditate on the Lord, but you want to engage in pastimes with Him. And that's what Gopa Kumar is longing for in his tour of the material universe as he goes on up. He wants the sweetness of pastimes with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we read that in that transcendental state of labdo pashanti, there is no supremacy of devastating time. One can never attain any real happiness without an appreciation, acknowledgement, and deference to devastating time. It is what destroys all attempts at happiness. So therefore, the intelligent person understands scientifically how there cannot be true happiness within the material domain because of this devastating time factor. Just understanding that alone saves you so much unnecessary endeavor. Just as the Bhagavatam says in several places, Krimivid Bhasma, your body is going to wind up either as eaten by the worms, excreted by the dogs, or burned into ashes. Why waste your human form of life? In fact, why commit sinful activities when that's the end result of the body anyway? DT says this about Indra. He's committed sinful activities. He's arranged to have my sons, Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha, killed by Vishnu. She doesn't blame Vishnu. She goes for Indra. Vishnu is in the background, but it's Indra who actually arranged all this. So I want a son who can kill Indra. Why is Indra enacting all this violence just for a material body that's destined to be worm food, dog food, or ashes? And of course, when Narada Muni encounters Nalakuvara and Manigriva sporting in their degraded way in the river, he points out, your body is just going to wind up in this way. Why commit so many simple activities just to indulge this temporary body? So understanding the time factor is very important. Even during the first explosion of a nuclear weapon, the lead scientist quoted Bhagavad Gita about how Kalos min, time I am, the devourer of the worlds. What about the devourer of our attempts at material happiness and prosperity? So there are two things that make material happiness inherently, essentially problematic. And we never can hear this enough. Number one is that material happiness is insubstantial. It's shadowy stuff. It allures, but does not deliver. But in the process of not delivering, it entices you onward. It allures you onward. Try again. Try again. Others are getting it. Why not you? Just keep trying. So that's number one, the insubstantiality. Number two, of course, it's temporary. So to be a good materialist, you have to dismiss all that. I don't care that it's insubstantial. I don't care that it's temporary. I gotta be me, and it's gotta happen right now. This is the kind of so-called civilization we live in. But that civilization is destroying the Earth planet. It's destroying human beings physically and mentally. And the idol, the deity, is economic growth. Without economic growth, there's panic. Oh no, how will people behave if there's no economic growth? Economic growth is necessary for morality. Just think about that. In order to have cooperative relationships among human beings, you have to have constant economic growth. Things can't stay still. An example given by economists is that just like an airplane has to move forward, it can't stay still like a helicopter. Similarly, a material society based on economic growth has to keep expanding because people want more and more and more and more. There's no training for anyone to control the greed, control the envy. So the people want more, and they want more, and they want more. And this is considered human civilization, which is simply leading to destruction. How can there be qualitative growth? This is what Bhagavatam is focusing on. How to develop the human spirit. And it's non-sectarian. Okay, you don't want to be a bhakta, you can be a mystic yogi, develop that way. You won't be satisfied, but you can be an impersonalist, merge into the Brahmajyoti, merge into the causal ocean, you can develop that way. In other words, it's not all just about exploiting the resources of earth. Later in this chapter, the Bhagavatam verse points out about the polluted aim of life that human beings have. So we're not just dealing with air pollution, water pollution, food pollution. We are dealing with a polluted aim of life that brings about all the other pollutions. We talked about the material conception of limitation, that you're dealing with a fixed amount of resources that the earth provides and a fixed amount of space for disposing of those resources. Actually, however, those who understand the system of Devotee worship and the hierarchy of consciousness present in the universe, they know that behind all the functions of nature are the Devatas, and then behind them is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, as you read in Bhagavatam, if human beings behave themselves in a proper way according to Vedic injunctions, the Devatas, this is described in Bhagavad Gita, the Devatas supply all their essentials. And of course, in the first canto of Bhagavatam, Kamam Vavarshyaparjanya Sarva Kama Dugamahi. During the reign of Maharaj Yudhisthira, the earth was overflowing with resources because of the consciousness of the people and the consciousness of their leader. So yes, on one level, we agree with the materialist that if you consider the earth as a fixed supplier of resources and with a fixed amount of space for disposal resources, then human civilization's in trouble. So a materialist, that means someone who knows how to live material life, which you don't have these days. A materialist has to cut back. And that's what intelligent human beings, amidst the degradation, that's what they're thinking. We've got to cut back. We've got to cut back. But Bhagavatam is offering a higher solution, that resources are not fixed. All you need to do is acknowledge the Devatas, and much better is to acknowledge the Supreme Personality God behind the Devatas, and therefore unlimited population can be supported if you would only change your consciousness. So this is our spiritual presentation, that a real human civilization emphasizes qualitative growth. That means developing the human spirit. And this is what's going on in the second chapter of Bhagavatam, second canto, and it's going on throughout the Bhagavatam. This is how revolutionary the Krishna conscious society is. It's changing everything from hellishness to genuine peace and prosperity if you'll give it a chance. What is the glory of this current civilization, so-called? They just are wielding a few basic substances. You could say, just like in this chapter, there's a verse about the world of names. While you're living in the world of names, interacting with the world of names, you should live simply, knowing that material life is just composed of a few things: earth, water, fire, air, space. That's it. It's the same if you don't recognize that, but if you really want to understand the substances that are so key in so-called human civilization today. It's concrete, steel, plastic, ammonia for making synthetic fertilizer, and silicon chips. So whatever you do, and of course there's fossil fuels. So whatever you do, you're just juggling these things around, trying to get peace and prosperity and inner satisfaction, and never understanding, as we read today, there is no supremacy. In the transcendental state of labdo prashanti, there is no supremacy of devastating time. Sometimes it's said that human beings today are basically, they're not yogis, they're not gyanis, they're not even demigod worshippers. Most of them are not bhaktas. What are they? Flesh-covered devices for burning fossil fuels. That's the reality. And we call this a human civilization. And now, without economic growth happening in so many places of the world, economic slowdowns, is there a recession, will there be a depression? Without that, everyone panics, and then they start their wars even more. Because what's the glue that keeps people together? Yes, there's nationalism, body consciousness. We are all this body, you are the other body. But the nationalism is all mixed with hopes for economic growth. The more we get, the more we want. And no one can control it. Every year there's so many meetings about climate change, this, that, the other. But no one can control their mind and senses. And the fear is we've got to keep the economic growth going because the people will go crazy without it. And why shouldn't the people go crazy without it? Economic growth is the goal of human life, the glue of human society. The Bhaktas call this animal life. So here you're presented with how to have qualitative growth, and there's no limitation. You go with qualitative growth, you can go beyond the cosmos. You can get into the causal ocean. You can merge into the Brahma Jyoti. You can develop mystic powers. You can meditate on the super soul in the heart, and then focus on Bhagavan. You can go to Vaikuntha. You can enter into the pastimes of the Lord. This is real growth. So these are various factors that come to mind in reading this chapter, which is very instructive, and it all is coming about just from Pritchard Maharaj's question. What's the best thing for a human being to do, especially a human being at the time of death? Are there any questions? Yes. Are you supposed to speak into a microphone? Well, you'll have to speak it loudly, and then I'll repeat your question.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu he liked the attitude of Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, who was famous for criticism never would leave his lips. He would, if he would not listen to discussions of the misbehavior of other devotees. He would say they're just serving Krishna, and that's all. But sometimes today we hear that such an attitude of aversion to fault finding is not practical, that we need to be like whistleblowers and find faults with others, or find out what's wrong and then broadcast that to establish justice and right doing. So when is it appropriate to find faults with others or criticize, take some side in an issue and give our opinion, or should we always just follow the example of people like Raghunath Bhatta Goswami?
I like two examples from Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and I try to apply those two to myself. He said that the only reason why I see a fault in you is because I have the fault a millionfold in me, therefore I'm the world's expert in the fault. The other point he made, he had a disciple who was randomly criticizing others, participating in criticism, and he pulled him up and said, criticizing others is a great austerity. I have to do it as a spiritual master with disciples, but it's an austerity. You don't have to do it. Why are you so anxious for such an austerity? It's a completely different way of looking at things. What I'm doing is austere. You don't have to do it. Why are you so eager to take upon yourself unnecessarily such an austerity? So that's what comes to my mind as prompted by your question. Anything else? Yes, Prabhu.
Maharaj, to what extent are we in the Krishna consciousness movement responsible for educating humanity at large to become genuine materialists?
First of all, to diminish the pride and arrogance, you can point out that you don't. A real materialist is someone who knows how to enjoy now and in the future. Enjoy now without destroying themselves and the earth, and in the future get a higher birth. That's a real materialist. But you don't have such today. So to diminish the arrogance and pride, I like to point out that we're complimenting you by calling you a materialist, because a materialist means someone who knows how to enjoy material life. They like to speak about just enjoy the now. But you don't understand that the now, the moment now, is packed with karmic influences from the past, and you're lining up reactions for yourself for the future. That's all going on in the now. So you're not a real materialist. And a real materialist understands the supremacy of devastating time. Now, yes, I know at some of the most elitist institutions in the world, the psychology department has grappled with this problem of the time factor ruining enjoyment. So they tried to come up with various techniques to prolong the moment of happiness. you know, they plot a curve on a graph. And so your happiness starts off seeming so fresh, your enjoyment starts off seeming so wonderful, and then in time, the graph plummets due to what they call hedonic adaptation, which is a sophisticated way of saying, well, hedonic means hedonism, that in all your material endeavors to enjoy, you're going to become accustomed to it. The thrill fades away. That's called hedonic adaptation. Everything starts out so wonderful, and then in a short time, the thrill fades. It becomes the same old, same thing. So how do you fight back against that? Through transcendental knowledge? No. They'll give you techniques for what they call savoring. And by these techniques called savoring, you can prolong the enjoyment for a few moments, and that's considered a great breakthrough. So I've heard them, such elitist professors, saying, we're going to teach you how to defeat hedonic adaptation. And what do they offer? Just how to prolong it a few seconds longer, that's all. How do you do that? You're supposed to increase your savoring. That while you're enjoying, you focus on it and never think it's going to end, because that'll ruin it. Just merge your consciousness into it, get into it. And then, even though it's temporary and it's just lasted a few moments, afterwards, the first thing you do is some physical expression of joy, like you jump in the air. That was great! Wonderful! And that increases the ecstasy, you see, supposedly. And because everyone has a smartphone, you should take a photo, because that helps you later to savor the magic moment. And what else should you do? Get on your smartphone, get on social media, and contact your friends and tell them, oh, it was great, it was great, it was awesome. And that prolongs your enjoyment, because you're savoring, and that keeps you in the bhava, the emotional state of relishing, for a few seconds longer. So that's the best they can offer. They say they're defeating hedonic adaptation, hedonism adaptation, and that means you'll be happier. Another way that is scientifically presented, which we all know anyway, is variegatedness. You can't just have one material endeavor for enjoyment. You've got to have lots of them and juggle them. And the more of them you can juggle, the more opportunity you have to prolong your happiness. Of course, we know that you're juggling so many items, they're going to crash to the floor, which is what's happening with people today. As the stress increases throughout the world, the depression, the anxiety disorders. Just like the US government, with a blue ribbon panel of psychologists, has just declared that a recommendation that anyone between the ages of 18 and 65 should get a checkup, yearly checkup for anxiety disorder. And especially youth between the ages of 14 and 24 should get an annual checkup for depression. Just like you get a physical every year, now you have to get a mental checkup, because according to their government statistics, after COVID, who knows if it's really after COVID, but after after COVID, 40% of the population had a problem with anxiety disorder or substance abuse. 40%. Seeing all this makes you understand that Srimad Bhagavatam is more important than ever. What other light is there in the dense darkness of the age of Kali? People accuse Bhagavatam of being mythological. Well, first they should accept that their attempts at happiness, their very concept of happiness is all mythological. Anything else? Yes.
Dandavat Pranam Maharaj, thank you so much. Maharaj, my query is that as you told about Gopa Kumar, what he has observed in Tapaloka, so what he has observed in Goloka Brindavan, because we know that what devotees are doing there in Goloka Brindavan, because we know that Lord Krishna is fond of grazing of the cows, milking of the cows and herding of the cows. So what devotees are doing there in Goloka Brindavan?
What are devotees doing in Goloka Brindavan?
As per Sanatana Goswami's that book that you mentioned about, Brihad Bhagavatamrita.
That's the end of Brihad Bhagavatamrita, where Gopa Kumar participates in Krishna Lila in Goloka Brindavan. This Lord in the Heart chapter is gradually bringing you there. And at the end of this chapter, you get mention of rati, attraction for Krishna's name, form, qualities, and pastimes. And then at the very end, there's the hint of prem, because rati leads you to prem. So it's all going on in this chapter. And the point is made that you certainly don't want to merge, and you, more than even meditating on the form of the Lord, you want to engage in pastimes with Him.
Maharaj, one more query is...
Let me see if others have questions. Thank you. We appreciate your eagerness. Vaishnavis, any questions?
Thank you, Maharaj, for nice class. Maharaj, in word-to-word meaning, the meaning of sattva, while explaining meaning of sattva, raja and tama, Prabhupada has added the word mundane, mundane goodness, mundane passion, and mundane ignorance. So I want to ask, is there another kind of passion, another kind of ignorance? And
these are Prabhupada's famous word for words that are making sure you get the point. We're not so bright as we think in this day and age. That's why we fall victims to the illusion, the myth of economic growth and material happiness. So he's just underlying, hey, in case you don't get the point, Sattva-guna is material, it's mundane. What to speak of Rajaguna, Tamaguna? He's hammering on your head.
Thank you.
All for our upliftment. Yes, our cow and agriculture minister.
I was hesitating to make the question, but Maharaj is also an advisor of the Cow Protection Agriculture Ministry. My question is, you pointed out that the deity of this age is economical growth.
The idol, yes.
The idol. And after 50 years of our society, we see that now many leaders are starting to see an alternative to this current economical growth that Prabhupada would coin simple living, high thinking. So do you think it will take us another 50 years to get that picture?
While we're trying to get that picture, anyone can see the world is fast deteriorating. So we may get some impetus from external events as we try to improve our focus on how to provide an actual human environment for devotees to make spiritual progress in. The current setup that's known as human civilization makes spiritual growth very difficult. It's not only environmental destruction, the threat of nuclear annihilation, it's also the stress, the anxiety, the depression. Everything depends on money. Where am I going to get the money from? And those who get the money, they are looked up to as the real heroes. And those without money, useless. So we need to at least recognize the false foundations of so-called civilization today. It's impossible. It can't work out. What they call economic growth is actually uneconomic. In real accounting, you would take all the costs and liabilities into account. But if you externalize, you set aside all the destruction you're doing to the environment, to human psychology, put that aside, that doesn't appear on your balance sheet, then you've missed the point. Even from the material point of view, your so-called economic growth is not economic. It's costing you more, but you won't see those costs. You set them aside. I like the way Srila Prabhupada says, we set aside. You can just visualize. Take this and move it over there. The problems of material existence. It doesn't appear in your accounting. So, with humility, anyone can understand that, okay, I don't understand the demigods, I don't understand Bhagavan, but I do understand that material energy, material situation's limited. There's only so much resources, only so much space to discard the resources. Something's got to give, and it's not going to be nature. So it's obviously we have to change. And then, as I pointed out, if you want to be more elevated, you recognize if I please the devatas, then more resources will be released. Remember the discussion between Nanda Maharaj and Krishna about the Indra Puja? And Nanda Maharaj is saying, our prosperity, the rain, the grass, all depends on our pleasing Indra. We do this every year. And of course, Krishna wants to establish, especially in his hometown of Vrindavan, that demigod worship is not to be considered as the ultimate factor, and he wants his Brajabasis to focus on him. So, where is even that preliminary intelligence of recognizing the devatas as ruling material nature? We don't find that. In the hierarchy of consciousness in the universe, human beings don't have the conscious powers of the devatas, who don't have the conscious powers of the Purusha avatars, who are beyond the universe in terms of its influence. So please be a real materialist. Recognize that your system doesn't work. It's assuming mystic powers. That mystically the resources will go on and on and on, and then our waste disposal will always have a place for it somewhere on the planet. It doesn't make sense. Therefore, uneconomic growth. All right. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.